So I'm sure most of you will remember the following. We had, and this would be from chapter 3. We had households and consumers here. We had firms somewhere here. And we, in this case, had an anti-clockwise flow. And this had to do with spending in this case. But something interesting happened here. And that interesting thing was that we had foreign currency or foreign sector outside. Now just let me know, what are the symbols for foreign sector? What are the symbols for foreign sector? You can put it in the chat or you can put on your mic. Hey, Ria, you're quick on the keys, man. You click on those keys, exactly. So it's X minus Z. All right, and in this case, when I think about imports, which one of these symbols were for imports and which one of these symbols were for exports? Which one of these symbols was for imports and which one of them were for exports? Absolutely. So we had X in this case for exports, and then on the other hand, we had imports, which was Z. Now remember, what we always want is that your exports should be greater than your imports, and never that your imports are greater than your exports. And today we're going to figure out as to why that is the case. Yes, exports out, import ins. And actually, on that specific note, Christopher, is that you'll also find that in this case, when it comes down to exports out, we're talking about injections. However, when it comes to imports in, we're then talking about withdrawals. Okay. Now, in our textbooks on page 334, there are a few things that I want us to highlight, and I've got a couple of questions for you. So on page 334 in our books, you'll see the words integration in bold. And what I want you to do is highlight that first sentence. And this is on page 234, the right side, second paragraph. It says, the extent of the extent of a country's involvement in international trade and finance is referred to as the openness of its economy or its degree of integration into the international economy. And this differs from country to country. Right, obviously stipulating that there are some countries that are more open than others, and there are some countries that are more closed than others. Countries that would be closed from each other would be simple as your Russia, your Koreas, and so forth, that don't necessarily have a lot of imports and so on. On the other hand, you get countries like the United States, which are fairly open when it comes to just their integration of the international economy. But that being said, guys, let me know in the chat, why do countries trade? Why can't we just basically achieve everything ourselves? Why can't we have an autarky? Let me know in the chat why you think countries trade. Caesar says we're interdependent. Love it. There's some truth to that. Yes. Vaughn says to gain access to the foreign resources and skills not available in our own region. Good, 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 good. What else, guys? What else? What else? What else? Some countries are better or more efficient at producing specific products. Sometimes it's wiser to import so we can focus on what we're good at, says Jesse. Okay, now this is excellent, guys. This is excellent. Now you'll realize that when it comes down to what we had the under resources, and this was going to tie in with basically Caesar's point, Vaughn's point, and Jesse's point. So everybody's point is that consumers have factors of production. And just remind me, one of those factors of production is land, the other is labor, then we have capital, and what's the last one? In this case, entrepreneurship. I do hear you there, Jesse, but entrepreneurship in this case, right? So these are the four that we have. Now you realize that different countries have these in different abundances, right? When it comes down to your resources, natural resources, tell me which country or which continent do you feel has the most natural resources? Yep, that's right, guys. Our continent. Right? When it comes down to labor, right? And when I talk about labor, I mean people who are obviously qualified and have the skills to do the necessary work. Where would you place that? Asia. Interesting enough, somebody said that today as well. Asia. Anybody else? Love it, Jesse. Love it. Right? So we've got Asia. Talk about capital, goods that were used to make other goods. What country would you say would be that? Goods were used to make other goods. Who's great at that? China, India. I'd agree to both. If I have to be honest, I'd agree to both because there's no hard and fast answer. We're just basically putting across what we think would actually be a country of that nature. Let's do the last one, guys. Entrepreneurship. And let's see if you're going to guess the different one than the other classes I've been guessing. Who do you think leads when it comes to entrepreneurship? Europe. I haven't heard that one. There was another country that people would actually put across. Yes, Jesse, that's the one. Everyone puts across the USA first time around. All right. So, guys, basically what this book is telling us is that these specific factors of production, every single one of them are not centered in one specific area. Instead, they are vast. And as a result, countries will sit down and say, we need to make sure that we begin to start engaging with other countries in order for this to also be of benefit to us. So I'm going to now go to the next bit or the next thought just around this. Now, for countries to obviously trade with each other, there needs to be two things that happen. Two things. The first is that there has to be what we call an absolute advantage. That's the first. And the second is that there should also be a comparative advantage as well. Okay, now absolute and comparative advantage are two different things completely. Okay, when it comes down to absolute advantage, it means that there's a country that does much better in producing a good than another. And what you'd want is to be in a position where the country that you're trading with is doing much better in one facet than you are in that facet, and they're doing much worse in the facet that you're great at. So the book gives us a definition of Zimbabwe and South Africa. And it says that, well, Zim can produce, I'll put shirts here, shirts, shirts here, and cell phones. So in this case, it says that Zimbabwe produces about 100 of those per week. But on the other hand, when it comes down to cell phones, they only produce 5. Now, SA, on the other hand, they produce 50 shirts and only 10 cell phones per week. Tell me, who has the absolute advantage when it comes to shirts? Absolutely right. And when it comes to cell phones, pretty obvious. It would then be absolutely right. So these two will then trade with each other because one of them will say, you know what, I'm going to do, I'm going to produce the shirts and then you can produce the cell phones and then we will do business together. That's one. Now, sometimes you'll find that a country will actually be better at both. Say a first world country as opposed to a second world country. And in this case, the book gives the following definition around Germany. And we still have SA. Right now, we're talking about comparative advantage. And this is when a country does better in both sets of criteria. Right, we've got shirts here. No, not shirts, sorry. Now we're talking about wine. And on the other hand, we're talking about cars. Now, as the book illustrates and depicts, it tells us the following, that it takes about 8 barrels of wine to produce in Germany. So a worker can have 8 barrels of wine that they produce on a weekly basis, or they could produce 2 cars. In South Africa, however, it would be 6 barrels of wine or produce 1 car. Now you realize here that Germany has an absolute advantage over South Africa when it comes to both goods. But these two can still trade. And how do we figure out whether they can trade or not? Well, it comes down to the ratio between the goods that they produce. So the second step here to figure out whether they can still trade, right? The second step is to put this into ratios. And Germany's ratio would then be 4 to 1. So I divided both of these by 2. And South Africa's ratio would be 6 to 1. Now that we have this new ratio, guys, tell me, which country between the two of these is much better at producing wine in comparison to the other? Which country is better at producing wine in comparison to the other? So you're saying Germany is better at producing wine as opposed to South Africa. Let me know why. Why do you feel that way? Okay, cool. So I see. No, we're talking about both. We're talking about both in this case. right? So in this case, guys, the right answer there would be obviously that SA, because they produce, as Ria's putting across, they produce 6 barrels of wine for every car, right? Whereas Germany only produce 4 per car. Okay, and that's why SA in this case would be better at producing wine. So I'll put there better at producing wine. On the other hand, I'm going to use a different color for this. Let's say purple. Who would you say is the better producer when it comes down to cars? Would that be Germany or would that be SA? And let me know also the reason as well. Who would be better at producing cars? And let me know why. So Jesse says Germany. Germany, let me know why. Why Germany? And if someone has a different answer, I just need to also know why. Absolutely. For every car they produce, they only miss out on 4 barrels, which means that there's less time spent on wine. Absolutely. But on the other hand, when it comes to South Africa, for every car that they produce, they lose out on 6. So it's really about the opportunity cost here as well, which Jesse's putting across. Okay, so these guys will sit together and they'll say, look, man, let's get into a deal together where we will basically ensure that you guys, or we in this case being South Africa, will produce the wine and you guys can produce the cars and vice versa. And if we do this together, then that means at the end of the day that we have something to trade. So we've got two there, absolute advantage and comparative advantage. And if we're doing absolute advantage, we want to make sure that we deal with a country that has absolute advantage in what they do, and we need that. But if it's a comparative advantage, it's about sitting down and looking at the ratios and then making a decision as to do we engage with you or not. And in this case, when it comes to Germany and South Africa, they can engage with each other from a trading perspective. I want you guys to do a bit of highlighting just so that when you do look over the material, it obviously still makes sense and you're able to do some references as well. In regards to the first thing to highlight, have a look at page 334. Sorry, not 334, 335 under 16.2. Why countries trade? Page 335. And if you're using the 5th edition, please just let everybody else know where exactly that would be. Page 335. Hold on, I'm just getting my charger. Right, now on page 335, I want you to highlight the following. The first thing it says self-efficiency. It says the notion of self-efficiency or autarky used to the popular used to be popular among politicians and citizens who wanted to be independent from other countries. But countries, like individuals, are economically interdependent. Then let's skip to the next paragraph and you'll see the word Adam Smith. Adam Smith began his famous book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, by emphasizing the benefits of specialization and the division of labor. He then used the same kind of reasoning to argue for free international trade. On page 424, The Wealth of Nations, he wrote, and I just want us to highlight the first sentence. It says, "It is the maxim of every prudent master of a family never to attempt to make at home what it will cost him more to make than to buy." And sometimes, guys, this is why we head to your general market stores and stuff like that, because I could try to buy, or rather create, produce in my garden, or I could just go and purchase it. It might cost me less in order to do so. On page 335, at the right top corner, you'll find the following. One of the basic reasons for international trade is the fact that factors of production are not evenly distributed among the nations of the world. Okay, and this goes back to one of the points that somebody had raised, that hey, we trade because we don't have it all. Then we've got absolute advantage, but what I want you to highlight about absolute advantage would be on page 336. Page 336, and it says the following. Both countries, and this is in the the first paragraph, after the second absolute advantage in bold. It says the following. Both countries will obviously gain if each specializes in the production of the good which it has absolute advantage, and they engage in trade. The principle is exactly the same as in the case of the two individuals, each specializing in what they do best, and then engaging in trade. That's to do with absolute advantage. Next up, comparative advantage. You'll see in bold, it says the law of comparative advantage. It says, according to Ricardo, all that is required for both countries to benefit from trade is that the opportunity costs of production differ between two countries. We now use another example to illustrate this law of principle. Okay, and they go through an example. Now, what's important here, guys, would be still on page 236, the third paragraph from the top. Will read as follows. Thus, although Germany has an absolute advantage over South Africa in the production of both goods, it does not have relative advantage in both. Put differently, Germany is in absolute terms twice as efficient in producing cars as South Africa, but it is only marginally more efficient in producing wine. This implies that Germany is relatively more efficient in the production of cars, whereas South Africa is relatively more efficient in the production of wine. Germany has a relatively or comparative advantage in the production of cars, while South Africa has a relative or comparative advantage in the production of wine. According to the theory of comparative advantage, each country will tend to specialize in and export those goods of which it has comparative advantage. Then on page 337, the first bullet point, international trade will occur only if comparative advantage exists. That is, that the opportunity costs differ between countries. If the opportunity costs are the same in both countries, there is no basis for trade. In such a case, equal advantage is said to exist. Even if one country has, we're on page 337, Kieran. Allow me to just put that down. Thank you for asking, Kieran. 337. First bullet point. Let me know as soon as you're there, Kieran, and then we'll continue. Perfect. It says the international trade will occur only if comparative advantage exists. That is, if the opportunity costs between countries, that is, if the opportunity costs differ between countries. If the opportunity costs are the same in both countries, there's no basis for trade. In such a case, equal advantage is said to exist. Even if one country has an absolute advantage in the production of both goods, but the opportunity cost ratio or relative price ratio is the same in both countries, there is no basis for trade. Right, next, on page 338, there's comparative advantage in action. Okay, and what I want you to highlight is the first paragraph, right? It says the following. Comparative advantage helps to explain trade between countries. In practice, however, countries do not trade with each other. Firms in different countries trade with each other. Moreover, officials do not plot production possibility curves or try to calculate opportunity costs to determine what should be exported and what should rather be imported. Like domestic production and trade, international trade is essentially based on self-interest. Firms exploit opportunities for international trade in their pursuit of profit. So it's not about South Africa trading with Germany. Instead, it's a South African firm trading with a German firm, or a German firm trading with a South African firm, right? Um, Let me know, guys, in the chat. Give me a thumbs up if we're more or less good when it comes down to why countries trade. Let me know if we're all good in that regard. If not, let me know whether I've lost you or not. But if we're good, give me a thumbs up. I just need about 3, then I'll continue. Ria says she's good. Everyone else? Awesome, Jared. Awesome, Amber. Great. So I'll continue then. Next up, guys, on page 338. 100%, Jesse. That is a brilliant example. Yes, that is what is meant by that. At the end of the day, it's either depending on which store you're walking into, right? That store has traded with China, and not necessarily the government saying, "Hey, Markhams, please buy this shirt from China." So 100%, Jesse, 100%. Right. In concern with trade policy, guys, one has to realize that when it comes down to these countries trading with each other, government, once again, which also places some sort of intervention, comes out with what we call import tariffs, subsidies, other non-tariff barriers, exchange controls, exchange rate policies, and a couple of other things. But I want to go through these things bit by bit. What I want you to highlight, however, would be the following. Firstly, under trade policy 16.3, it says the following. By now, it should be clear that the opening up of trade between countries leads to a greater world production of traded goods and, by implication, to increase the economic welfare. Nevertheless, every government takes steps to protect domestic firms against foreign competition and to control the volume of imports entering the country. The measures used include import tariffs, quotas, subsidies, and other non-tariff barriers and exchange controls. Now, when it comes to import tariffs, which is the next bit, right, it says that import tariffs are duties or taxes imposed on products imported into a country. They're used to protect domestic firms against competition from imports, protective tariffs, or to raise government revenue, which is then called revenue tariffs. There are 2 categories of tariffs: specific tariffs and ad valorem tariffs. A specific tariff is a fixed amount that is levied on each unit of the imported commodity. So for every bottle of wine that I buy, perhaps 5 rand is added on top of it, and that will be a specific tariff. On the other hand, an ad valorem tariff is a tariff that is levied as a percentage of the value of the imported item, right? Which I find very tricky, because as long as I'm importing an item, I'd want whoever is sending it my way to say, hey, this is actually much less than the actual value, all right? Now, we get 2 types of tariffs there that follows. Revenue tariffs are usually imposed on an item that are not produced in the domestic economy, right? Revenue tariffs. So if I decide that I'm going to buy the new Lamborghini, and I tell you now that is a beautiful looking car, which will probably cost about 20 mil, right? What will then happen is that for the government to make revenue on that specific product, they'll then say, Grant, we want 20%. And that means that essentially I'll pay 24 million rand to get my beautiful Lamborghini transported from, in this case, Italy, all the way to South Africa, right? Now, when it comes down to protective, yes, they should end up in SARS. they should end up in SARS because it is a type of tax. But sometimes the government might have it end up in a different entity. And perhaps what I probably want to Google right now would be where do tariff funds go? Yep, we got it. South African Revenue Service, SARS. Oh, I see what you did there, Jesse. I see what you did there. I see what you did there. All right. So definitely SARS, not government. Definitely SARS, not government. Very interesting stuff that's happening there, Jesse. Very interesting stuff that's happening. The other measures that they have, guys, are quantitative restrictions, which is we'll only import a certain amount of goods, right? And it says that an import quota is a quantitative restriction on imports, whereas tariffs are aimed at influencing the prices of imported goods. Import quotas seek to control the physical level of imports. Import quotas are therefore a form of direct intervention in the market mechanism. The main difference between this type of protection and tariffs is that with a tariff, the government gains extra revenue, whereas with the quota restrictions, the benefit of a higher price resulting from the limited supply goes to the seller of the goods, unless the government takes prior steps to prevent this. So obviously, from a government perspective, we are going to want tariffs as opposed to quantitative restrictions. Next up, subsidies. And subsidies are pretty simple. Allow me to explain on the board. So for instance, if there's a SA firm, yes, we did the protective tariffs. It says the protective tariffs, on the other hand, are imposed on to protect the local industry or sector of the economy from foreign competition. And allow me to explain that. Sorry, Ray, you're actually right. I didn't necessarily explain how that works. So in this case, when it comes down to protective tariffs, guys, essentially what happens is that the government will put up tariffs to ensure that they protect the local economy. Now, in my mind, and let me know if you guys also know this, there are three industries that I know of that have tariffs attached to them. Let me know if what industries these may be, and you can put those in the chat. What industries do you know that have import tariffs or tariffs, protective tariffs in this case specifically? Let me know in the chat. Absolutely, retail, and in this case, I'm going to call it textiles. Absolutely, there's certain types of machinery as well. In this case, I'm actually going to put certain cars as well in that category because they are machines essentially. What else, guys? Give me one more. Hmm. Precious stones or metals as well. Now, our majority of the lesson, I'm going to talk about textiles specifically. Right now, when we talk about subsidies, guys, in this case, and Ria, thanks once again for just letting me know. When we talk about textiles, guys, if I'm a company that is selling t-shirts at say 30 Rand, this is my retail price, but it costs me 30 Rand to create them, right? So this is my cost and this is my selling price because essentially what ends up happening is that the whole world is selling them at 30 Rand. Tell me, how long will I be in business for? Oh, wow, wow. Very positive, guys. Very positive. 100%. It won't be for long. It won't be for long. It's only a matter of time. So what government will do is say, look, Grant, look, we want to help you out, right? You obviously are in textiles and you've got people that you hire and you want to make sure that the employment doesn't drop. So what we're going to do is that we are going to fund you or subsidize your t-shirts, and therefore we'll give you 15 rand for every shirt that you are selling. And what does this do for me? It means that it cuts my cost in half, and therefore I only have 15 rand in cost for that. And which means that when I decide to finally go out into the marketplace and sell it for 30 rand, essentially I'm making profit now. Now tell me, does this mean that my business is efficient? Let me know in the chat if I'm getting a subsidy. Is my business efficient if I'm getting a subsidy? I would agree with you, Jesse. In this case, it wouldn't be the case. And Amber, I know that you're quite the entrepreneur. It would be great to hear what you have to say around this as well. Guys, it wouldn't be the case. It wouldn't be the case. This would be a great starting point, but it wouldn't be the be all and end all of my business. In fact, if anything, if I don't improve, I'll essentially also get out of business. Yes, that is the truth. Where is the room for growth? And the room for growth in this case is that you'd have to look at your business and say, how do I make myself more competitive? How do I make myself more competitive? All right. That's subsidies. Now, other non-tariff barriers, and we're on page 339, basically are agreements that countries have with each other. So, for instance, SADC has an agreement where they'll sit down and say, you guys, we're going to trade amongst Southern Africa, right? And what we'll do is that Namibia, you're going to trade in this, and Botswana, you're going to trade in this, and Malawi, you're going to trade in this, and this is going to be the agreement that we have amongst each other. That is a non-tariff barrier, right? Now, exchange controls now comes down to, and it says there, an alternative to imposing limitations on internationally traded goods is to reduce the flow of these goods by restricting the amount of foreign exchange available for their purchase. So you decide that I want to buy a sports jersey, and what the country then says is that we don't have enough foreign reserves for that. Now, obviously, a t-shirt is a very small item, but it might be something that maybe costs 20 million or something of that nature. The country might say, we're going to set a restriction. You can only purchase goods up to 10 million, right? The exchange rate policy would obviously follow on top of that as well. And then obviously with general comments there, all we're trying to say is that whatever restraint is employed, right, the intention is to increase the demand for domestic goods at the expense of foreign suppliers who can supply the goods for more cheaply than domestic firms. And what that simply means is at the end of the day, guys, what we want is to ensure that our country is obviously benefiting from domestic trade, which is why we have proudly South African, right, to buy South African more than we would other firms. That also means that we also pay a larger price for supporting local, okay, which I'm sure you guys have noticed. So what I want us to do now, guys, is that there are obviously arguments for the use of trade barriers, which is why we should have trade barriers. On the other hand, we also have arguments that are against trade barriers, which is we should demolish barriers as a whole. So for the next 5 minutes before we go on to our break, I'm going to break you guys into two different groups. And what I'm going to ask you to do is within that group, basically come up with an argument for one, and we'll just hear the different arguments in that regard. All right. I'm just trying to do that now. Breakout rooms. There we go. Okay. And here we are. And I'll tell you within the group, of course, which assignment you guys will have. Okay, guys, can you hear me in this group? Group one? All right, guys. Can you hear me in this group? Okay, guys. What I want you guys to do is basically put two arguments, right, for the use of trade barriers. Put two arguments together for the use of trade barriers, and then elect amongst you who will obviously be the person who will speak on behalf of the group, right? And you have until 10 to in order to do that.